Hey everyone, welcome to part two of the skull. We're going to go ahead and finish up labeling the skull bones, or labeling our skull notes rather. We'll be looking at the temporal bones, sphenoid bone, ethmoid bone, and then after that we'll do a part three and we'll wrap up with the facial bones. So let's go ahead and start here on the temporal bone. Our first structure is the external auditory meatus. That is this structure right here. This is where sound waves pass through your ear and enter this canal. Eventually they run into your cochlea, which is a sense organ in your inner ear that converts those sound waves into action potentials. And based on the frequency and quantity of those action potentials, you can hear different pitches and tones and volumes. The next structure is the zygomatic process. We've looked at zygomatic processes before, one on the frontal bone, and then a little bit later we'll be looking at one on the maxillary bone. This particular zygomatic process is on the temporal bone, and it's labeled there in pink. The next structure we can see from an inferior view. It is called the mandibular fossa. It's right here. In the other video where we look at the actual model, you can see how the head and the condyle of the mandible fit into this fossa, and as you talk, this is where that joint is moving as you open and close your mouth. It's actually, if you look in this picture here, you can see the head of the mandible. It sort of fits right into that mandibular fossa. If you were to put your finger in your ear here and open and close your mouth, you'd actually feel the head of that mandible moving. The next process, or the next structure we're going to look at, is the styloid process. It's right there. It gets its name because it's pointy, like a stylus. You can't really decipher it very well. I think it's right there on the actual sketch. These sketches aren't the best, but they're good for labeling. You can see this in more detail in the video. Actually, probably for several of these structures, you'll have to rely more heavily on the videos that I do where I use the app, the Essential Anatomy app, and I label them. But this is a good start, and it's good to have some notes. So the next process is the mastoid process, and if you put your hand behind your ear, you can feel this sort of bump, this bony mass behind your ear, and that's it, the mastoid process. Here it is from the inferior view. The notch I will do in maybe a light green, and it's right in this area here. Mastoid notch. The stylomastoid foramen is right in between the styloid process and the mastoid process, is right there. Very small. It's even tough to see on a real skull. Carotid canal is a cool one. From an inferior view, it's actually pretty easy to see, fortunately. It's right there. You can sort of see it from a superior view. What's interesting about this canal is it does two 90-degree turns. So you can see it here, it takes a 90-degree turn sort of anteromedially, and then it empties out into this other foramen called the foramen lacerum, and then the artery inside of it, the carotid, is a right turn. It goes up to your brain. I'm going to go a couple slides forward. Here's that foramen lacerum. It's tough to see, but the carotid canal from the inferior view is like over here, but then within this bone, within the temporal and sphenoid bone, it actually turns left and then the artery pops up right here. Don't worry about anything like that for the quiz, but just an FYI. Jugular foramen, we're not really going to be able to see in our notes, so just if you want to write next to jugular foramen, reference the temporal bone video, the other temporal bone video. That's a better place to see it. Same with internal auditory meatus. These are just really small foramen, and without the right view and the right level of detail, it's kind of tough to label here. So let's go to the sphenoid bone. Oops, I already started to draw some stuff. The greater wing, when you watch the sphenoid bone video, you'll see that this structure kind of has two different wings. And they kind of sort of look like wings. Here's one. This is actually the lesser wing. And here is another. Lesser and greater. I'm going to draw this a little bit differently so it doesn't interfere with another structure I'm about to draw. Although that was accurate, but I'm going to label something here in a second called the sella turcica. Sella turcica means Turkish saddle, and it looks a bit like that. The pituitary gland sits in here and is well protected by this structure. Optic foramen, if you just want to write a note here to reference the sphenoid bone video. Okay, so for inferior and superior orbital fissure as well, we're going to have to reference the sphenoid bone video. We can look at these next three, foramen, rotundum, ovale, and spinosum. Bear with me, they are pretty small structures. Let's do rotundum in a light blue. Okay, so this one right there, that tiny little perfect circle, you can see that there's an oval here. This one right here is kind of in black. That is actually our first of the three foramen. It's called the foramen rotundum. This oval is foramen ovale, so that's a good name for it. And then spinosum is this tiny little dot. So it goes ROS from medial to lateral. And I'll touch on this in the video, but a good way to remember this, because they're so tiny and so close together, is just sort of maybe draw them on your notes, kind of how they are arranged. So there's R, there's O. It's hard to draw with the mouse. Here is purple, spinosum. So from medial to lateral, they spell ROS. So I just kind of remember that. ROS. Rotundum ovale spinosum. Now this is a right side, so the left side would be a mirror image. It would go ROS. It's ROS, medial to lateral. ROS. ROS. All right, oops, and I did not color code my letters here. ROS. Foramen lacerum, this is that foramen that the carotid canal actually empties into. So it's right here. And that is a terrible circle. I'm embarrassed that you guys saw that. I'm sorry. There we go. Medial pterygoid plate and lateral pterygoid plate. Probably the best view for that would be an inferior view. So I'm going to steal this. Don't tell anybody. And I'm going to put it here. Right about there, I guess. And again, you're going to be able to see this a lot better in the other video, but you have these two plates. One is right here, and the other is right here. You have some muscles called your pterygoid muscles that attach there. So this one is the lateral pterygoid plate. The first one we drew is called medial. It's up to you how you want to use these videos. I would probably pull this video up alongside the sphenoid bone video so that you can kind of go back and forth. There's just something about color coding your notes that's helpful. The act of labeling, at least for me, helps me remember things. So it's up to you how you want to do it. That's probably what I would do. I'd probably have both videos up. I would watch the labeling, and then I would play the video on the models, and you can kind of compare and practice and quiz yourself. Okay, that's it for the sphenoid bone. Let's take a look at the ethmoid bone. Not nearly as much going on with the ethmoid bone. So the cribiform plate actually looks pretty cool on a real skull. It's right here. It's this thin little plate, and there's two of them, one on either side. In your olfactory bulbs, which is the end of your first cranial nerve, it sits. One sits in each cribiform plate, and that is where particles in the air you're breathing make contact with that nervous tissue, and that's where you smell things. At least that's where smell originates, and then it goes to your olfactory cortex, and you interpret it as different smells. So that's it in purple. Cribiform plate. Just medial to this cribiform plate, in between the cribiform plate that would be on the left side, right here is something called the crista galli. It sort of looks like a shark fin. You'll see it better on the video as well. It just divides the two cribiform plates and the two olfactory bulbs. This next structure is one of the few structures whose name just makes a ton of sense, and it's right here. It's called the perpendicular plate. And guess what? It is a perpendicular plate, so I love that name. Before I explain perpendicular plate, I just realized it's very easy to label crista galli in this mid-sagittal view, so I'm going to do that. So if you kind of see what I mean about it looking like a fin, you can sort of see it there. And then in this view, you're just looking at it from a top-down angle, so it just looks like a thin line. But anyway, back to perpendicular plate. It's right here. It's this big plate. If I were to look at the skull from a front view, like in, say, this picture, that is it right there. The bottom part is actually called something. Oh, I didn't mean to draw that. The bottom part is called something else. It's called the vomer bone. But from what you can see right there, that's the perpendicular plate. There it is. And again, this is one of the facial bones, so you don't need to label it here, but just so you can see that, this right here is called the vomer bone. Okay, so perpendicular plate is done. Let me put something here. Superior concha and middle concha, don't worry about labeling here. The video is really good. So I think we're good with ethmoid bone for now. So thank you guys. That's it for labeling. These are probably three of the worst bones for this activity, just because these are such small structures and difficult to see structures. So do not lose heart on following along with these coloring videos. I think you'll find them more useful as we get into some different bones. Okay, thanks guys.